War before my life, no get rest. Trouble full ground, wahala no the end. But when I call the name of the Lord, Name give me peace way past understanding. I find peace for Jesus.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up, well, a truly fascinating, maybe even unexpected set of sources. We've got comprehensive notes and analytical transcripts from a study group that went deep, really deep, into just one intense chapter of ancient law, Leviticus chapter 20. Okay, so let's try and unpack this. Our mission isn't just to read the rules, it's to pull out the core insights this group generated, about holiness, spiritual boundaries, the consequences, and crucially, how they connected all that ancient stuff to modern life. They kept coming back to this one central question, it seems. What happens when the center of individuals or community is not God, but something else?
Yeah, and that question, that's really the key to unlocking Leviticus 20, isn't it? This chapter, fundamentally, it's a call for ancient Israel to be consecrated, to be set apart, maintain purity, both ritual and moral. And the sources, they really emphasize this wasn't about God being arbitrary. It was seen as vital for national survival. The severity of the laws, often death or being cut off, was designed to keep the nation pure. And, frankly, to act as a powerful deterrent against adopting the practices of surrounding cultures.
That really does set incredibly high stakes from the get-go, and we see that primary command right away. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and do them. The note stressed, like you said, this wasn't just about private thoughts or feelings. The expectation was visible, communal loyalty. It had to be lived out.
Exactly, and that's where the structure gets so, interesting. The study group, they really zeroed in on this idea of communal responsibility. God didn't just give rules. He expected the community to be active. The Israelites were, in effect, asked to police covenant life. That's the phrase the notes used. They had the responsibility to sanction, even remove covenant breakers using tools like stoning, harsh as that sounds, to stop spiritual corruption from spreading. They called it contagion.
Contagion, wow. How did the group wrestle with that, with the idea of policing covenant life, especially when the consequences were, so final?
Well, their conclusion, based on the texts, was that the severity really underlined how serious God viewed the defilement of his name and his community. And if they failed to act, if the community just looked the other way, that brought corporate consequences. God basically said, if you don't deal with this, I will. He promised to intervene directly. I will set my face against that man and against his clan and will cut them off. So apathy wasn't really presented as an option when the nation's purity was on the line.
Right. And that leads directly to that ultimate, really stark warning for the whole nation, doesn't it? The text warns them specifically, don't walk in the customs of the nations I'm driving out before you, the Canaanites. If Israel failed to stay separate, they got the same warning. The land itself, their inheritance, their life source, would vomit you out.
Exactly. Separation wasn't just a nice spiritual idea. It was presented as the actual mechanism for possessing the land and surviving in it. It was that fundamental.
Okay, so the sources moved pretty quickly into specific prohibitions. And this is where the study group really started making those connections to today, sometimes quite pointedly. The first big one detailed is the condemnation of giving children to Molech.
Yeah, and the sources provide that really sobering historical context. Molech was a Canaanite idol, often linked with securing prosperity, apparently, and the ritual demanded this horrific sacrifice of young children. The notes describe how they were literally placed on the idol's burning metal hands. It's hard to even comprehend. The group's analysis then explained the theological reason behind this absolute prohibition. God's holiness, his very nature, demands that the vulnerable live, not die. The law sets these really clear boundaries to protect the weakest, the defenseless, against exploitation by the powerful. The core insight they pulled out was that when adults sacrifice the weakest children for their own gain, whether that's prosperity, power, or even just cultural acceptance, that's seen as a fundamental violation, a profanity against God's name, making his sanctuary unclean. God cares deeply, the text suggests, about the vulnerable child.
And that principle, sacrifice the vulnerable for adult desire, that seems to be what fueled the group's very specific modern reflections, right?
Yes, it seems so. They took the principle behind the Molech ban and applied it to what they saw as modern equivalents where the vulnerable are sacrificed. One key connection detailed in the notes made by participants was to abortion. It was described in their discussion as the willful destruction of a defenseless child in the womb. What should be the safest place?
And their reflections went beyond just physical destruction. Based on the notes, they saw other kinds of sacrifices.
Precisely. The notes mention sacrificing children for career and prestige the idea of, quote, letting children raise themselves while parents pursue the American dream. So parental absence or abdication was framed as a kind of sacrifice. And there was another explicit connection made by at least one participant, linking modern cultural trends around transgenderism back to historical accounts of the androgynous god Baal, sometimes identified with Molech. The underlying theme, really, regardless of the specific example they raised, was this idea of sacrificing the future generation or the vulnerable for adult self-interest or prevailing cultural ideas. And, we have to be clear here. These are the interpretations recorded from the study group's discussion in the source material. They obviously highlight the real difficulty people face in trying to maintain specific spiritual boundaries in today's world.
Absolutely. And reporting those interpretations neutrally is key. So maintaining that boundary, that leads us right into the next section of the chapter. The focus shifts a bit from that specific physical sacrifice to broader spiritual and relational boundaries that also, according to the text, defile God's name and sanctuary. The text hits hard on spiritual contamination, what the group apparently labeled as syncretism, mixing loyalties.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, or maybe alarming, is that God seems to take this mixed loyalty just as seriously as the physical transgressions. He frowns upon syncretism, trying to blend the worship of Yahweh, the one true God, with other gods, the smaller gods, as the group called them, or consulting mediums, necromancers, spiritists, that kind of thing. And the notes showed the group found this incredibly relevant. Like right now, they talked about people today consulting psychics or spiritualists engaging in occult practices while still claiming to worship God. The theological point hammered home is that Yahweh demands pure, singular worship. Any divided loyalty is treated as a serious offense, also punishable by being cut off. Because it poisons the well, spiritually speaking, for the whole community. It corrupts that collective identity.
Okay, so from that spiritual contamination, the chapter then pivots pretty abruptly, doesn't it, into this extensive list of forbidden relationships and sexual acts. For anyone listening, this section is really detailed. It spells out exactly who cannot have relations with whom within the community. We see adultery, naturally. Then various forms of incest, a man with his father's wife, his sister, his uncle's wife, and specific prohibitions against male same-sex relations and bestiality. And the punishments listed are, again, terrifyingly severe. Offenders shall surely be put to death, or they'll die childless, or in one case taking both a mother and her daughter there to be burned with fire. It's an incredibly detailed and frankly brutal boundary system. Why did the group think the text went into such specifics here?
Yeah, that's the critical question they asked too. And the reflection recorded was that these boundaries were absolutely vital for defining Israel's unique moral identity. You have to remember, they were living amongst, or about to live amongst, the Canaanites. And the surrounding cultures, their religious rituals and social norms, apparently included many of the very practices listed here as forbidden for Israel. So God's laws, in this view, function to preserve Israel's social fabric, their cohesion, their morality, under intense cultural pressure. They created clear taboos to prevent assimilation, to mark them out as different, morally distinct from their neighbors.
So the severity of the punishment is directly linked to the severity of the threat. Not just personal sin, but like an act of national identity erosion.
Precisely. That's how the group interpreted it. The moment Israel started adopting the sexual norms or the spiritual practices of the cultures around them in these really foundational, intimate ways, well, their unique identity, and by extension their right to the land promised by God, was immediately jeopardized. These boundaries were like a concrete wall reminding them constantly, you are set apart. And if you look at, say, the prohibition against lying with a male as with a woman, which the text calls an abomination, the group discussed that the issue wasn't just the act itself, but the profanity, the blurring of divinely established categories, which they understood was a characteristic feature of some Canaanite fertility cults. So these sexual boundaries doubled as spiritual boundaries.
Okay, that brings us to maybe the ultimate question the study group wrestled with, looking at all this. Why? Why does God take sin, these specific transgressions, but sin in general, so incredibly seriously that they require these absolute life and death consequences in this covenant?
Well, their key reflections on sin's nature, as recorded in the notes, seem to center on three things: its ultimate cost, its destructive result, and its persistent condition. The cost, they concluded, was just staggering. Thinking ahead theologically, sin ultimately required the Son of God to die. That fact alone indicates its extreme severity. There was, no cheap fix. Second, the result of sin is always separation, division. It's fundamentally anti-good, as one note put it. It works against God's creative purposes, aiming to destroy his creation, especially humans made in his image. And third, the group really emphasized sin's condition. It's described as highly attractive, even addictive. They use the phrase slippery slope. So these severe ancient laws were seen as a kind of emergency brake, a mechanism to halt that slide before it became irreversible for the entire community.
That's a really heavy reflection on sin's nature. But the sources, they also provided an important modern perspective, didn't they? Acknowledging the shift from the Old Covenant context.
Yes, absolutely. They definitely acknowledged God's immense forbearance, his long-suffering today. They noted that God generally doesn't punish immediately and corporeally today in the same way he sometimes did under that specific Old Testament covenant framework. And that patience, they agreed, is a critical window, an opportunity for repentance, for turning back, for re-anchoring in his ways. And we tie this all back to the big picture of the chapter. The core message about holiness keeps coming back to that declaration: I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Holiness isn't something achieved purely by human willpower, by gritting your teeth. It's presented as both a gift from God and a demand by God. It's about identity. It requires total devotion and loyalty, the notes say, in every part of life, private and public. You simply can't represent a holy God adequately with a compromised, divided life. That was the takeaway.
Yeah. You know, this deep dive into Leviticus 20, pulling from these study group notes, it really shows how these ancient concepts, spiritual cleanliness, separation, consecration, they still resonate so powerfully. They define that ongoing tension, don't they? Between God's unchanging boundaries and the constant pull of cultural trends.
Absolutely. And the whole basis for that call to holiness, the whole foundation, hinges on that phrase repeated over and over in the chapter. I am the Lord your God. He sets the rules, not arbitrarily, but because he's the one who redeemed them, who set them apart in the first place. That claim of lordship is the bedrock for the demand for them to be distinct.
Right. Well, the source material, these study notes, they ended their discussion with a really clear challenge for everyone involved, and it feels like the perfect final thought to leave with you, our listener, this week. Just mull this over, explore what it might mean for you. What is one area of your life, big or small, that you feel invited to consciously re-anchor in God's lordship this week?
But when I call the name of the Lord, name give me peace way past understanding. I find peace for Jesus, peace way world no feet give. I find peace for Jesus, now him they make my heart they live. Darkness walker, light don't show. Jesus power don't take control. Joy they flow like river inside me. Now his love they set